sending out the fantasy awards for MVP, most improved player, defensive player of the year, rookie of the year, and comeback player of the year. So to tease it, my fantasy MVP was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I'm curious of who your fantasy MVP is.
I think that's fair. As you note in your article, in ADP of about 45. So, you're talking about a guy who's giving you top 3 value at that pick. I think that's a huge jump. So I have no problem with that. I think fantasy MVP, I would lean Nikola Jokic, just because he's top ranked fantasy player. But I can see an argument for SGA, see an argument for Joel Embiid as well. So I think it's one of those 3 would be my fantasy MVP of the season.
I agree with that. And I had my honorable mentions was Joel Embiid, Jokic, and Jason Tatum. Love Tatum just because, and I think I'm probably going to be putting Jason Tatum. I'm going to rank him aggressively next year because his availability is a great skill set. That dude does not take games off, despite playing through injuries and stuff. Like, he's just a very valuable fantasy player. And imagine that ceiling if Jaylen Brown actually ends up leaving. Ooh, man, he's going to be a beast. Yeah. So fantasy most improved in play. Who's your most improved player?
I think it's got to be Lauri Markkanen for me. He was a guy that I don't think anyone expected an all-star season out of him when he was included in that Donovan Mitchell trade. Like, okay, he could be a good piece, but I don't know, it felt like we had seen his ceiling early in his career in Chicago, but that's not the case. He's someone who has the look of a player that could be a future building block for that franchise, and it translated into fantasy value as well. So I think he would be my pick for most improved player.
Yeah, he was a guy that carried an ADP outside of 90 in the beginning of the season, man. And to be a top 20 player by year end, and just the growth. I mean, became an all-star, points just by far a career high. And then he also did it in free throw percentage, 3-pointers made, field goal percentage, assists. Like, I mean, dude was just an absolute monster. I also gave honorable mentions to Tyrese Halliburton, who I think, shouts to Zach Hanshu, who had him ranked as like the number 2 player in fantasy this year. Definitely took a leap up. Mikal Bridges, I'd say that was more so like a improvement from being a role player in Phoenix to alpha dog in Brooklyn. Also, Nick Claxton had a huge jump this year. Leads the league in field goal percentage. One of the best blockers in the game. Definitely did not foresee him being a top 50 player for this season. And the last person I neglected to mention was Jalen Brunson. Certainly deserving of that, being that his kind of a role change too, of role player, off the bench to bona fide starter and huge fantasy asset. So yeah, I think all of those are definitely reasonable options as well.